You ever heard of whole brain thinking, whole brain learning? So there's a lot of divisions that you can have. There's even a traumatic, like, have you ever heard of traumatic brain injury?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, so if you had a concussion, you had a bit of a traumatic brain injury. It could be to different levels. Sometimes you can be completely non-functional afterwards. Sometimes it just kind of sticks there, and you develop Alzheimer's later in life, or Parkinson's disease, or some other neurological dysfunction. But at the end of the day, if you think of a person, they can be split in many ways, right? But you can be split right to left, top to bottom, front to back in your brain. It's just the way it works. Depending on where you get hit and your own weakness and everything else and your mental training already and how active you are in your mind, your brain's like a bowl of jello, and yet it has the most intricate network of computing that's almost past what we can imagine or even compute in terms of zeros, in terms of connections. It's like, it's so complex, so fine, so amazing, and yet it's a bowl of jello that, like this, and boom, it's like you can create all sorts of changes in it in a moment that way. And so, like it's very easy, depending on brain training, for your prefrontal cortex. So these are your eyes, and you're looking out this way. You have this front part, and that's a lot of your consciousness tends to be your conscious mind tends to be in your executive function, your ability to decide, to do things, and all that. A lot of what you know as you, that you actually know as you, or you think is you, is happening right up above here, right?
Okay.
And so if you do a divide, suddenly it's like you're conscious, but like your assistant, like your genius assistant that gives you all the answers and helps you out and everything. This is all gone. You can literally be totally awake here. And so you're up out of bed and all that, but then large parts of here, you could have whole sections. You're like, I can't find words. Well, like your word function is like split off, right? And so you can have all these things happening here, and there's no like ability for you to take your eyes and open up your brain and look inside what's happening. So you just know something's off, but you're like, what is off? Why can't I? They're groggy in the morning. Like parts of your brain just haven't come on board yet, and you're divided from them at that point. They're not useful. And so you can have deep sleep here and double the arousal of normal wakefulness here, and you can have all these issues. So you can be split in your brain, and that's actually a huge issue for people. Modern day lifestyle, the stresses of modern day lifestyle, oftentimes will downregulate or upregulate specific portions of your brain. So constant distraction. Distraction is said to actually be brain damaging, because what's happening? You have a neurological function happening between two parts of your brain, and then in a moment it's interrupted. It's diverted to another section. It's like, oh, well, we just went off the guardrail on the superhighway. Boom, we're down in the ravine now, right? And so you create these breaks in the road. It's like a avalanche. And you're thinking, and you get knocked off, you get distracted so much that there's no longer a neurological superhighway because it's been rerouted so many times. And so they actually say that distraction alone can be brain damaging. That's from experts saying that, like brain damage.
It's interesting. So multitasking technically is brain damage.
It's terrible for you. I once did an exercise. Not only that, it's terrible for productivity. So even if it didn't change you afterwards, while you're doing it, because the function of the conscious mind, one thing you do well, ever, right? However, you probably have like 100,000 things happening back here, right? Or billions of things happening all simultaneously that you're not aware of. So all you see is the thing that actually happens consciously. But they say there's something like 80,000, 100,000 images that you kind of see, different they're almost like micro dreams, and they're like streams of them happening. And eventually some of them bubble up, and just some of them stay in the background, and you're never aware of them, right? Just kind of like you're not aware of most of your dreams.
Mm-hmm. Right.
These are just like images, and so fundamentally we're image creatures. We see images, we think in symbols, and and so all these things, they're in your brain, and you're not aware of them most of the time. But as you start to become aware of them, you can start to open up connections to your subconscious mind. You don't want to be divided from your mind, any part of you, right? And so there's different ways of stimulating those connections. Next level. So first of all, I want to say a couple things about pain and in relationship to this whole idea of being traumatized, fractured, split in terms of your personality and who you are. So first of all, we learn these kind of trauma-based ways of feeling, right? And so you have like a heart here, and that's your feelings. And then you have your head. And so we talked about this already, but just to go over it again so that I can take it a little further. You have these ideas, these experiences, they're facts about what happened. So in your mind, there's now a symbol inside your brain when you remember it. And you learn a whole strategy inside you. Like once you learn it, this is the way you do this type of thing, right? And so, trauma oftentimes forms in childhood. Now it can form in adulthood too. PTSD is very common among adults in the military and out of the military. But essentially, what these traumas are is a learning around things that are extremely painful. So you've now learned a new way of doing pain. And most people, they completely avoid triggers. To the extent that they're conscious of how they feel afterwards, they avoid it because it's too painful. They get triggered into either something that's extremely painful and their brain goes crazy, or they get triggered out of it. Either one is problematic, right? So you can be way over aroused. Like PTSD is pretty common, where it's just like suddenly you're constantly anxious, and then you're activated such that everything in life becomes a trigger. Pretty soon it's like a disease. And so it used to be like one trigger, where it was the actual experience that triggered it. Now whatever the traumatic experience was, could have been a firefight, you lost somebody that you loved or you cared for, was part of your team, and it all happened very vividly. And so there's these real, true, 5 sense triggers where like a boom of a firework causes those things. It causes all the trigger of the original event, so that it's like you live through it over and over again. So that's one problem. Then the other problem is where it causes all that, and suddenly your system reacts, and boom, you basically go offline. Like all your senses go. You feel like disoriented. There's something, you talk about disassociation, right? Some form of association happens to where you can't even access basic sensations. And this can happen across all 5 senses. So your taste can come offline. All of the things, we talked about like trillions of bits of information coming through every second. Where does it all go, right? Trauma-based programming will alter how you receive and process all that information. So you're still processing at the subconscious level, but all your 5 senses are suddenly being down-regulated to where, especially usually the most important things you need to know to sense around you, those just disappear. And so you wonder why life seems so dry. Oftentimes it's trauma. And you don't have to have had a terrible childhood or a difficult traumatic experience to have this happen. Oftentimes it's very minor things. Parents were a little stressed out. Hey, what parent hasn't been stressed out? If you've been a parent, Kids process it, and they're unable to process your adult life. Boom. It could be that your kid watched how you have learned something. So they never experienced first level trauma themselves. They just see that you were traumatized. They didn't see the trauma, they didn't understand it. But they saw that now you're a traumatized person, and they watch how you experience life and process it in a traumatized fashion, right? And so just imagine that you just think of trauma as an unwell way of dealing with potential pain in life, right? How do you undo that? How do you re-experience it? Well, it's a learning. It's a pathway. It's a wiring inside you. And the only real opportunity for you to rewire that is to have something similar happen and then choose something differently, right? And so if you have a problem with disassociation, an example is, I'm going to try to reassociate. Well, that's just not as easy. It's kind of like trying to like something that you don't like. It's not that easy, but you can put yourself in a position where you kind of need to. And so an example is, I call it pain therapy, where you literally do something really difficult or painful. It might not have anything to do with your issues. So someone was sexually molested, right? You don't have to go back to that. But the problem is it affects every part of your life. So go to one of the other part of your life that's being affected and redo that, rather than trying to revisit that traumatic episode. And so here, you have a major body issue. And we're going back to here. You're looking at your thoughts, your feelings, and then how is it affecting how you work things out? You're saying, I feel, it's like every time something is hard, I get distracted. And it's like I have another thought and I'm over here, right? Well, let's not do that anymore. I'm going to do something hard specifically, and in my mind, intentionally train the proper pattern, the opposite, right? And when I'm intentional about it, when I choose this trigger rather than just happening to me, the trigger, then I can also be much easily, and I'm ready for it, I've already intended, now I'm going to create a new pattern, right? And so what we're going to do is we're going to do two hard things, those of us who can. First of all, we're going to do the breathing, Wim Hof breathing. Basically, you're going to think you're going to die because you're going to hold breath, okay? It's not so bad because we alternate back and forth, but part of it is you always push yourself just a hair more than you're comfortable for. So you don't have to actually be dying, don't worry. Even if you pass out, as long as you're sitting in a chair, you'll be okay. But the point is that normally you can go another 2 minutes after you think you're going to die before you pass out. So you'll be just fine if you go another couple seconds, right? You're always going to take what your discomfort level is and go another 5 seconds, right? Oh, I'm going to die. Another 5 seconds. I'm not dead. Okay, let's go another 5 seconds, 5 seconds at a time, you can go another 30, 40, 50, 60 seconds, right? And so you're training yourself is, I'm safe. I can do this. And so there's a new way of thinking about that type of pain, right? That type of discomfort, which is really existential. Basically, it's a crisis of existence, as when they say existential. So it's really a crisis about you existing. You could die. You know it internally. You know it. And you get this reflex. You're going to start trying to breathe, and you're like, don't worry. You can let yourself breathe anytime. You always notice the feeling instead of disassociating from it. You look back and say, what did that feel like? Okay, next time I do this, I'm just going to I'm going to push another 5 seconds, right? Then notice that feeling, right? And suddenly you're walking through pain, but you're doing it consciously. So you're undoing disassociation. You're recreating consciousness in an area of your life, a whole set of neurology, a whole experience that was divided off from your reality. Now you're saying, no, I'm changing how I do this. I am going to do hard things, right? And so, and again, from previous teaching, what do we know about that? It increases your overall level of well-being, because now your body is going to permanently try to say, oh, that person had an issue. So now we're going to set a higher level of homeostasis for ongoing well-being, okay? And it's the same with the cold water. You're going to go in, it's going to be shocking, and so those of you who can't do it, just imagine it, or do a cold shower at your house, But what you want to do is you go in, and it's like, for me, hey, I'm a whip, but I love the feeling afterwards. And so I don't judge myself that I can't do it 15 minutes or an hour like some crazy people can. I'm good with a minute or two of ice cold water. And always at the end, I'm going to try to put it on my face. That's the most sensitive thing, and it hurts the worst. It's the scariest thing, to cover your face over with something that's like ridiculously painful, because a lot of people, their sense of who they are is in their head. For me, that's very true. I'm over intellectual. If you guys didn't tell this, I'm just like a little on the intellectual side. I'm trying to correct that, but that's all part of me being self-aware. So I go under my face, and my sense of awareness of who I am is right here. It's even more like difficult. My face feels like, that song that talks about,
Can't feel my face when I'm with you.
Yeah, I can't feel my face when I'm with you. Yeah, exactly. It's like, I can't feel my face when I'm with you, or whatever it is. I don't know.
It's pretty good.
It's hilarious. I was shocked to hear that one. I was like, what's that mean?
Andy, just trying to apply some of these concepts.
Go ahead, yeah.
So with these experiences, would you suggest that the disassociation, it's my understanding that that's when, your mind and your hearts are not in alignment, they're separate.
Correct.
So as you're going through these exercises, are you forcing yourself to bring those back in alignment?
Yes. And you could say your heart and body are the same thing.
Heart
Right?
and
So
body.
you're trying to, your heart and body are kind of the same thing. And so you don't want your physical experience to be separated from the mental part of it,
Okay.
right? And so you take your conscious mind, which essentially is like this kind of prefrontal, they call it prefrontal cortex. It's above here. That's typically associated, at least in what I've seen. Nothing's truly as divided as they want to say when they talk about it, right? But everything's more connected than we can imagine. We're just trying to make sure it's truly neurologically connected in our experience.
Sure.
So we want to take this part of us and direct ourselves back to some way of recognizing, accepting this painful thing, rather than rejecting it and saying, this is not part of me.
Fighting it.
I will fight it. I will put it away from my experience. Pain is a gift. People don't realize that. I mean, there are some people that I think probably, I don't think, for instance, like BDSM, sexual play with pain, I think that people are oftentimes trying to find an inner way of dealing with it. I don't think that's the most positive thing to do in general, but whatever you do in your bed, I'll sign off on without looking at it, okay? That's up to you. At the end of the day, like, we have to have a different relationship with pain if we're going to be more successful. And part of it is recognizing that pain, the real pain, is what happens after the pain. That is going to change you. And if it changes you for the worst, then it really is quite a bit worse than the pain itself. So a lot of people, they feel it, they never feel it fully. And because of that, they separate off from a whole part of their body. And that same part of the body is good for pain and pleasure. So you're taking your experience and dividing it off when you experience these and don't associate. So you said it talks about disassociation.
Yeah.
But the opposite of that is association. Association, it just means that two nerves are connected, right? This nerve fires when this nerve. They say nerves that fire together wire together. And outside of the camera, we were talking about how you could use that to recreate connections in your brain using physical exercise, right? So suddenly you're more whole because you're doing these. And great intellectuals throughout the millennia used this to go to a whole nother level. They didn't understand it as such, but it was those exercises they were doing that caused them to be greater because their mind was greater when their body was attached. Right?
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, we call detached brains from bodies zombies.
Yeah.
You know, and so people that are fully aware, they have their senses about them. You know, and your senses modulate with experience. You need to create experiences that cause your senses to modulate or calibrate. You know, so that the right amount of sense is coming through to you, so you can make skillful decisions, you can enjoy life, and all these things, right? And so the exercise is simply saying, learning to say, it's okay that I feel pain. I don't reject this. I accept it. I embrace it, right? I heard a story about an Navy SEAL, I can't remember if this was David Goggins or one of the other ones, but he said, when you're doing breath holding underwater or the cold, they go out there, they have to go out in the cold oceans and like go for hours. So when you do that, if you start thinking in any way about something that distracts you from the experience, whatever it is that I can distract from this pain, the second you do, you're gone. You will lose everything that you need to continue. But if you can 100% say no, I'm going to let everything go and focus exactly on this. I'm going to associate, I'm going to be here. You're learning to associate. Not only that, you're learning something. See, when you're trying to think specifically and well, you'll find the higher levels you think, the more of a variation of idea. Like, you don't need to simplify too much. You actually can think about things in more detail, right? And so, like, if you never think about something, you won't have much knowledge about it or have much detail, right?
Right.
And so, like, if you've disassociated it, you've lost your awareness. And now what happens is that all you know is that everything that's painful is painful. That's all you know. So you cross the line into pain, and that's what it is. And then when you cross back out of it, it's no longer painful. That's all you know. And so you hyper-generalize something that is actually quite complex. Instead of it just being like, oh, well, it's just painful, and when I cross into here, it's painful, and not, or vice versa, and now we're not. But let's think a little bit clearer about it, right? What is pain? Where is it coming from? When do I feel it? How much of it is it? You know, like, is it pulsating? Is it changing? Is it moving in different parts of my body? All these things you totally lost because all you knew was that it was painful. That's the only thing you knew, and you don't like it. Pain, bad, you know, that's like your kind of internal mechanism saying, pain, bad, what?
That's what, kind of my question I was going to ask was, like, is that like associative muscle where like you can tolerate and like you do the ice bath and then you like, is that universal? Like, does that apply to any type of pain? Or is it specific to like, okay, now I can tolerate an ice bath for longer? Or does it translate to like, now I can have more difficult business conversations?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, you hit the nail on the head, Chase. Like, the key in business, one of the things reason nobody can do, like so few people are successful in business, you know why? They can't have a hard conversation with another person, right? And so they have all these deficient social ways of dealing, but the first thing that happens, you have to deal within yourself.
Yeah.
You know, you can't see things clearly if you have all these weird ideas where you've separated things off. And every time you have a hard conversation, you see their pain, it triggers your own pain, your own undealt with trauma. And so suddenly, instead of focusing in on what's actually happening in front of you with the other valuable individual, I will say, instead, you're only able to see your own internal program. It divides you. You're not able to have a skillful, hard conversation with somebody where they might be upset, but then you're able to help them navigate through and de-escalate, right? Because you got your own crap you've not dealt with. And it was one of the biggest things is dealing with pain. Perhaps the biggest reason to do it is because you need it in order to do the things you're called to do with the important people in your life, right? That includes team members in your business. That includes your clients, your whoever else, you know, every vendor or person that you exchange value with. They need you to be on your game. And to the extent you are, you'll provide way more value in the relationship. You'll get way more in return, right? And so your relationship, it starts with the relationship with yourself. And if you're traumatized and you have all these undealt with things, triggers, that just are destroying you, taking you off your game, moving you here and there, you don't have power. What we're looking for in all of this is to increase our consciousness, but you cannot be conscious if you're just being pushed around. Your reality is up and down. There's triggers over here. You're boom, you're down here. This happens over here. You're like, oh, and you're like a ship in the sea, as they say. You know, you're back and forth on the waves. You don't have stability internally, and therefore you're not able to create the results and make the impact you want, that you choose to, because you're not in control. Everything's triggering you, right? And so what you're learning to do is absorb all the things that happen from outside through stimulus that are knocking you around, and suddenly you're absorbing it. You're the same person.